Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. My name's Kate Giles and I'm a buildings archaeologist at the University of York. I'll be chairing the event today and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here to the Tempest Anderson Hall. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, John Creighton. John first started excavating as a precocious teenager with his local archaeological society in North London and apparently never quite believed he'd end up making a living out of it. For much of his career, he's lectured at the University of Reading, working on projects across France, Spain, Germany, and in the UK, including for the local audience in East Yorkshire. He is best known for his work on Iron Age and Roman Western Europe, on the nature of power, money, and how it impacts society, and the origin and development of towns. So medieval York is an unexpected departure for him, so please be kind to him today. We are delighted that John is joining us today to talk about his very exciting findings at York Minster. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate. There are all sorts of academics, some who know everything and are always right. Others who, the more they learn, the more they realise they don't know anything. There's so much more that they don't know. And they suffer from imposter syndrome. I'm an Iron Age and Roman archaeologist, and I'm here, coming into York, to talk about medieval archaeology. What's going on? Well, so why am I here? What happened? I am slightly terrified by this, it is true. During COVID, I arranged I put in a grant with Martin Millett of University of Cambridge to do a study of Roman York. Viking York and medieval York always seem to get the most get highlighted in tourists coming here. And we were thinking, there's been so much work, very small scale, since the 1980s on Roman York, that the whole place had needed kind of a re-evaluation, looking at what's been found from the perspective of an outsider, not necessarily the people who worked at York Archaeological Trust or the other units which did quite a lot of work here. So we did what was going to be called a grey literature project, having a look at all the unpublished literature, and also going through all the antiquarian literature. As well as that, we thought we'd do a little bit of extra field work. So let's go straight onto this. I'll go back and show you what we're doing in a second. We thought we'd also, we couldn't dig up the whole centre of York, that was just never going to happen. But we thought we'd try and do a bit of ground penetrating radar throughout the city. So these are the areas that we did. We covered a fairly large area within the Minster Precinct, because it's about the only open area within the town. A little bit of area outside in the Museum Gardens, which is why the photograph publicising this talk is of the Museum Gardens, not of York Minster. And also all the streets in the city as well. I'm not going to talk about any of that Roman stuff. When I started talking about this project and thinking about it, we always joked that probably the most important thing to come out of this Roman project will be all the stuff in between the modern day and the Roman period that we see around the Minster when we surveyed there. Because obviously there's so much potential in that landscape and so many historically very interesting possibilities of things we could have found, not least the original Anglo-Saxon Minster. So, I'm going to talk about, to start with, I'm going to introduce you to ground penetrating radar, which is what brought me here. And then I'm going to, like a good archaeologist, go back from the modern day, back into antiquity, through the Victorian period, the creation of Dean's Park, through the Jacobean mansion of Arthur Ingram, and then back to the Archiepiscopal Palace, and then the Anglo-Saxon period. There'll be a lot of maps. There will not be lots of fantastic reconstruction drawings. That's kind of Kate and her team's speciality, because I haven't got to that stage yet, and it's not quite my thing. But I think you'll find that by the end of this, we've got a very, very different conception of the Archbishop's Palace, which is kind of going to hopefully put York a little bit more back where it should be in terms of thinking about the grandeur of the palace that was here, compared with how it's been generally envisaged over the last few decades. So let's start with ground penetrating radar. Sometimes, when you do ground penetrating radar, you get amazing results. If you watch television detective stories, ground penetrating radar always shows the outline of a skull or something in a way that is not even remotely realistic. But sometimes you get data which is really clear, especially on greenfield sites where you can go over it multiple times to get very, very high quality research level data. We didn't get anything quite like that at York, unfortunately. I'm going to show you to start with what we got, and then we're going to try and untangle it. So, this is the area I'm just going to focus on, Dean's Park itself, not the wider precinct, but just Dean's Park. So, we're looking at a vertical, vertical picture. We've got the Minster down at the lower side, and we've got, actually I can use this pointer. We've got the Minster Library here. We've got Pericast chambers here, the chapter house and the Minster itself, and the Treasurer's house. But this is Dean's Park. So, let's just turn this into a map. Now, this is a picture of the ground penetrating radar of the very, very first level where the signal just bounces off the surface of the ground. And what we're going to do just over 30 seconds to a minute is going to quickly time zoom down 2 and a bit meters down into the ground. And let's see what you can see. The little gaps, things like this, are trees, which we've gone around instead of chopping down because that seemed a bit rude. And you'll start seeing things appearing like, if you're local, you should know what that is. All sorts of lines, and what's this appearing up here? This looks like a quite nice building. All sorts of other lines and things. The key thing is what you don't have. Do you have a nice plan of an Anglo-Saxon minster like the one just north of Winchester Cathedral? No. Or do we? We'll come back to that later. Nice buildings down here as well. At the moment, that's the only really kind of unexpected thing, this nice building there. But we're going to start peeling this back and trying to work out how do we understand this picture. After about 2 meters, you can't really see very much. The resolution starts to disappear. Part of that is a function of the frequency of the ground penetrating radar antennae that we use. You can sort of optimize them for different depths, and you can have different frequencies for looking for deeper geological stuff. But 2 meters down, we thought was going to be pretty good. Now, we've got this picture. How do we start to make sense of it? It's an incredibly long, boring, tedious method. First of all, you take each individual time slice, or 5 centimeter image, and then just draw around, digitize every single feature fairly subjectively that you can see. Every line, every blob, whether you know what it is or not. Then you superimpose 46 layers of all of these, and you realize that you've digitized, by clicking around them, over 11,000 different objects. And you've got RSI, and you really need to give your hands more love and care and attention. Then my habit is to just give them all a slightly translucent color. And then if you've got lots of reflections all in the same place, it probably suggests you've got a substantial feature, like a wall or something. Whereas if it's just one slight blob in just one 5 centimeter thing, it could just be a single stone. So you can start to pick out some obviously fairly major structures, but also buildings and other things. And if you want to then go back and query it, I can hover my mouse over different areas, click certain things, and work out roughly what depth those features are at. Are they high up or low down? Now, in a city centre, you've got a huge amount happening. So you also need maps. You need to go back to your maps of your modern day topography. These are all exactly the same areas as the previous images. So the 2020 Ordnance Survey map, all sorts of earlier Ordnance Survey maps going back to about 1852, the first edition, far more elegant. Estate plans, in this case, the Ingram estate managed to generate a very large number of plans, usually to do with legal cases. Says something about the estate. And there's some early maps of York which aren't quite so useful but interesting. They're not very useful at this scale, but can tell you something about what the Archbishop's Palace was like in its sort of terminal days before it was reconfigured by Arthur Ingram. Now, I came here for the Roman stuff, sort of. And if we're just going to zoom up to this area here, just to show you that we did manage to find some Roman stuff. At which point I will then ignore the Roman stuff completely, because it's not as interesting as the other bits. So, here we go. You will have noticed the big building on alignment with the Minster Library and the chapel. But there are also, at about 1.80 meters to 2 meters, all these features on a different alignment. So blowing that up, we've got all of these walls here. As a technique, this blows my mind away, that you can actually see something 1.80 meters to 2 meters underneath another great big medieval stone building. You can see something Roman underneath it. And it's not a complete plan, but you can start to envisage a plan of what it is. That's kind of phenomenal, what you can do in non-intrusive archaeology now. And if you start looking at that, we need to start trying to interpret what it is. Now, this is in the northwest corner of the north corner of the legionary fortress, so it's going to be barrack blocks that we're going to be looking at. And there have been some excavations around the Minster Library, or actually under the Minster Library. One in 1980 underneath the chapel, and then another when the Minster Library extension was constructed in the late 90s. And from those, it was wasn't imagined, it's kind of pretty much proven, that we probably have two barrack blocks at right angles to each other, because that's what you get in Roman forts. When you add all of these red lines on, which came from our ground-penetrating radar, this was the bit I've just shown you, but this is a bit in the Dean's Garden, you can then start plotting out all the other barracks, because legionary fortresses are a bit boring and regular. Ultimately, on the scale of kind of Tutankhamun of discoveries of archaeologically fun things, yeah. Let's move on to the rest. It was great. It's fantastic to show what GPR can do in towns. Sorry, there's one fundamental thing I need to mention before moving on. We only found Roman remains in this area, not in any of this other area that we covered. The reason is, it's too deep. We were seeing stuff down to about 2 meters, 2 and a bit, but thereafter, we couldn't see things. And you see a slight colour change in the background here. This is slightly more bluey green, and here it's a little bit more yellowy green. The yellowy green is slightly higher land. So there's just slightly more overburden. And you actually increase in depth, so increase in height, ordnance datum, from here to here, about 2 meters. Now, this is very important for knowing, or having an idea in our mind, that something early could still be deep down there, but it's got to be quite deep. So we can still miss things, even in this data. Now, chapter 2. We're now going to start right at the surface and start going back in time. To start with, looking at Dean's Park itself for this first section. So here's the current map of Dean's Park, where you've got the chapel turned into the library and the minster itself. You'll all have walked around there, hopefully, at some point. If not, do go, please. Now, what we do here is we start coding all these individual digitized features. We start coding them with different labels, saying, I know what that is. So it's a path, largely because I've got a plan and a map from the Ordnance Survey, or indeed I've walked around it and I know it's a path. So all of these are modern either asphalt, modern paths or the asphalt over sort of the parking area right next to the Minster Library. There are odd other lines which appear very, very high up, so only a few centimetres underneath the ground. Compression marks from a vehicle driving over the area. Now, I don't know when all these vehicles were joyriding in this area, because that's kind of behind the railings. Now, it could be in order to sort of lay out some of the occasional kind of fairs there that they've had there over the years, Christmas fairs and things. It could be in order to do restoration work on the Five Sisters, which has been done on a number of occasions. But that would mean the compression marks have been there quite a long time. But you never know, you notice this. The other place I find compression marks is in the Dean's back garden. I think it's a marquee, it's a big rectangle, so definitely a bit of a party animal because it's serious compression. But anyway, it's a big rectangle in the Dean's garden. I'll let him off that one. So we start trying to think, what of these features can we understand what they are, and then we discard them. The other big thing that we have, obviously, in the middle of the garden, the middle of the park, is this. This is the 1941 static water tank, constructed there very early on during the war in order to try and counteract the potential fire risk should the Minster catch fire, which it has a bit of a habit of doing. Over time, it's repeatedly occurred. So this enormous static water tank was constructed, and we've got the blueprints of it, and the match is perfect. And indeed, I used it to help draw it in as well and digitize it. We call that called cheating, but anyway. I also managed to dig out of the archives a picture of it, from which the RAF took in, as it was being constructed on some aerial reconnaissance test flights, which is kind of nice. I don't think we'd kind of seen this particular image before, largely because it's been misfiled in Swindon. But anyway, what else do we have? We also have all of these service lines. So anywhere in a town centre, you're just going to have water pipes, gas pipes, sewers, all sorts of services running under the ground. So often you'll see something which is dead straight, or bend around and go, okay, that's going to be a service pipe. And if you have a map like this of all these potential red lines, which are service pipes of some sort or another, or at least I think it could be a straight line wall, but I don't think so, you start being a little bit geeky and walking around Dean's Park and realising how many inspection hatches, how many inspection covers are there, hatch covers are there around the place. We don't call them manhole covers anymore. And you start linking them with all these red lines, going, all right, that's what that one is, that's what that one is. So that the Minster now potentially has some idea as to what's under the ground, because people are very bad about keeping records of these things. Let's go back a little bit further in time. If we go back to the 19th century, we can start seeing other features of the layout of the gardens as they had been at a different stage. So all of these are a whole series of paths, which you can see on the 1851 or 1890 Ordnance Survey map. Big, large circular walkway, when the whole of this area and this area were all part of what was called the Residence Garden, which is now partly owned by Perrycast House and partly part of the Minster. There's also this large splodge here of somewhere where I'm never really going to see what archaeologically there might have been underneath, because this is where the new deanery used to be. The new deanery is where the current dean lives. The old deanery was south of the Minster. It's all a bit confusing. There are just so many deaneries. But this is it looks a little bit horrid. This was knocked down in 1940. But in its heyday, this is a plan of where it was. In its heyday, while it was still clean and before air was polluted, it would have looked absolutely amazing. This was constructed in 1828, and quite a lot of new houses or refurbishment was done in that early part of the 19th century. It wasn't just the deanery which was built, the new deanery which was built. It was also the chapel itself was refurbished significantly. There you go. This is a drawing of what it used to be. And from the same angle, this is what it is now. The end was completely restructured and reformatted, but the windows and the side remain the same. This was done by William Stout, and it was a really, really good for its day reconstruction. So not so much reconstruction, refurbishment, really, of the chapel. Very, very sensitive to the architectural form of it, but nonetheless, as you can see, completely changing the front of it. We also have another new building built in the corner, and that's the residence, now known as Pericust Chambers. The residence was built for some of the canons, but didn't last. Now, okay, so that's the 19th century. You want to race through and get to the early stuff. With all of these new buildings, this was only possible because an awful lot had been cleared from the landscape already. And this is really where we start coming to Ingram Mansion. If we have a look and see what's left in the ground penetrating radar to try and understand, these are the bits that are left. We still haven't found, going back to the 19th century, anything to explain all of this. We still haven't found anything to explain these lines, that line, those lines. Well, I suppose they could be surfaces, but they're a bit scrappy. All of these. So we've got to find different explanations for them, and that's fairly straightforward. Quite a lot of buildings were cleared. This, at the beginning of the 19th century, was the stonemason's house. It's the stone yard for the Minster. Probably largely by part of the reason why it was quarrying away the buildings that were there. It was actually slowly dismantling and reusing stone from pre-existing medieval buildings or bits incorporated into Ingram Mansion, and then reusing them in the cathedral, reusing them in the Minster. And this is where we need to start really going into how a completely different kind of landscape. Fortunately, we're in the period where we might not have good plans, but we do have wonderful illustrations of watercolours and paintings, nearly all of which, but not quite all, are in the art gallery here. As you've got the numbers here, nearly all of them are also visible online and can be had a look at. Here you can start seeing this is the building which has just been completely erased from the map now. The same building from a different angle, same building in a slightly earlier phase, but clearly showing dilapidation. All these had, in a former life, been part of Ingram Mansion, so that's what we're going to turn our attention to now. Yeah, there you go, a bit of a blow-up of dilapidation. Ingram Mansion was probably one of the most palatial buildings in York within the walls, which means I can get away without saying it was more or less palatial than King's Manor. It was constructed or put together, I think probably it's better calling it put together, by Sir Arthur Ingram. Sir Arthur Ingram was a challenging character. There's a great biography, and by Upton, I think it is. He made his money originally in alum mining and in collecting customs dues. And he made tremendous wealth from also going into the property business. And he became a property magnate. By the end of his day, he had over 40 manors in Yorkshire alone, let alone elsewhere in the country. He was rapacious. He was loathed by lots of people because he was a sharp operator. He would take on, either buy places or take on leases, and then be so outraged at the condition of the places he'd just leased that he'd try and take the vendor into Chancery, into the Court of Chancery, in order to push down the price. And going into Chancery was something you never wanted to happen, because that was just basically death for a court case. It would take years and years and years and years for any dispute to be settled, and you would never see any money. So everyone would then settle instead for reducing the price of the lease or whatever. So whenever Arthur Ingram ever wrote saying a property was in a terrible state, which is what he said about the Archbishop's Palace when he took on the lease of the palace, you can never quite believe him, because this was his modus operandi. He was a very useful member at court, very good at financial management, but loathed by all the other courtiers. And so in the end, he was made Secretary of the Council of the North, sent away from court, nicely out of the way. Now there's a problem. He wasn't president of the Council of the North. The president was the one who got to stay in King's Manor. He, however, had his offices, not in King's Manor, but as a secretary, he had his offices, let's just show you, just over here, just in front, directly in front of the Minster, of the west doors of the Minster. So he got a lease from South Cave of the prebendary mansion of South Cave, because all of these were now kind of being secularised and leased out. So he got the lease for this orange bit. Then, that was in 1613. Then, in 1616, he got appointed the warden to look after the Archbishop's Palace, and then took on the lease of the Archbishop's Palace, of which you probably had a range of this orange bit. And then a few years later, he also took on the lease of the sub-deanery to the north. And then he built a series of ranges connecting all of them, so that he now had an enormous, great big mansion with all the latest mod cons in it, sort of. He also ensured that within those leases, he actually got the access to the whole of this area, the old palace grounds, in which he installed fishing ponds, massive fishing ponds, because everyone needs to fish. We have a bowling green here, because everywhere has a nice bowling green. Even Canterbury had a bowling green in the outer court there as well, is what all Archbishop palaces needed. And here, a tennis court. We'll just zoom into the tennis court. This is, of course, indoor tennis. This is real tennis. None of this Victorian affectation with turf, which just makes it softer to fall on. This is an enormous building, which we actually have quite a few references to historically. 1620s, tennis was a way that if you were a social climber, you could show self-control, forethought, planning, judgment, strategy. So it's a very good way that if you sort of wanted to kind of position yourself in court, you and your descendants and friends, this is what you had. You had a tennis court. Where was the other tennis court? In York, King's Manor. It's in the Museum Gardens, what's now very close to where the observatory is, in a former granary of the Abbey, I think. Tiny possibility it might be in one other location, but that's where I'm pretty sure was the dimensions seem about right. So a tennis court. That went through a number of stages over the next few generations. It became a theatre for a while, as people would just start, presumably tennis went a little bit out of vogue after the Civil War, etc. It then became a riding school. Now, this isn't somewhere for stabling. This is for the dragoons. This is for the cavalry. At this point, in the mid to late 18th century, you have the cavalry billeted in York. They don't have barracks anywhere. They're in a whole series of lodgings around the city, let alone their horses as well. And so this large barn of a building, and it was an enormous building, not quite as plush as the Viennese riding school, I must say. This building was therefore used by them right up until towards around about the 1790s, when finally Fulford barracks were constructed, and a new riding school was built there as well. And then this sort of ceased to have that function. While it was still a riding school, you also had a balloon accidentally bump into it, because that just happens, which suggests something about the size of the building. The balloon was only within 2 years of the first, well, within 1 year of the first manned balloon flight in Paris. So kind of quite early on. There's balloon mania was spreading across Europe at this point. And the balloon sort of came up, hit the riding school, then sort of floated over, got caught in a chimney where the carriage or basket got stuck, and then the balloon finally crashed in Blake Street. It's all in local newspapers. Scandal. So where is it? This is where the plan of it shows it should be. So the plan shows that this is where the Minster Library is, the old chapel is, and this is where the riding school should be. So if we have a look at our ground-penetrating radar, you'll notice, yep, we've got a wall precisely along those lines. Now the question is therefore all the rest of this must presumably predate that. So all the rest of this is clearly some kind of medieval building. Whether any of that was still standing, whether these are reused walls or just constructed on top is unclear. We don't have enough evidence to say one way or the other yet. Oh gosh, time's getting on. But if we have a look, we do again have it showing in some paintings. Here are some paintings, and this is the tennis court showing behind the chapel. That's the tennis court, so it's pretty big. And there it is as well. Just these bits on the side. So it looks as though it might be very good masonry, but probably a modern top stuck onto it. And very good masonry, and perhaps an arch there, which is probably what you need if you want to get lots of horses in and out fairly quickly, I guess. Gosh, time is going on. If we go around, sorry, I remember why I put that in there. I'm now going to move across to here. One of the important things about the ground penetrating radar wasn't so much to show what was here, because we do have these maps, but was to try and lock in as closely geographically as possible those maps with contemporary kind of maps and cartography, so that we can see exactly how the mansion linked with a building that had been here, which was St Mary and All the Angels. A chapel, this chapel, which had been founded in the early Norman period, around about 1154, and had been discovered after one of the earlier fires by the Abbey in excavations in 1839. This matched perfectly with our GPR, and has enabled us to locate how that interfaced with the Abbey, with the Minster. I'll just go to this plan. And we can see the evolution from the 12th century through to the 19th of the original Minster, or rather the original Norman Minster. St Mary and All the Angels next to it, this kind of two-storey chapel, the gateway coming into the Archbishop's Palace, and then the range, the west range of the palace. And then we see South Cave Prebendary Mansion, then we see Ingram linking the two. But we also see St Mary and All the Angels gradually being nibbled away at by the expansion of the Minster. And then finally, completely disappearing, all traces of it, except for just a tiny wall, all gone. And now it's all completely gone. Now, from my point of view, this is actually the most important bit, because this establishes this wall as the boundary wall of the Archbishop's Palace. And it's of significantly deeper foundations than anything else, than some later additions onto it from Ingram, which just don't even really show. Now, that has implications for the layout of the Abbey, of the palace. Now, this is the main point of the talk, and I'm running, I'm not quite run out of time yet. Now, the palace has largely been seen at York as not being something which was terribly well developed. That there are certainly buildings here, there are certainly things here, but the archbishops fairly early on decided to spend much more time at Bishopthorpe and at their other establishments, rather than investing here. This is how it kind of has been seen with the Archbishop's Chapel, a possible building seen from, or extrapolated from the same Minster library excavations here. There needed to be a great hall, which you find referenced in sources. We have our arcade, which can still be seen in the park, and something along the range here. I'm going to change that quite a bit. First of all, what should we have with a palace? Here are a few comparative ones. Generally, even though there's no hard and fast rules with anything, you're going to have, and this is Canterbury in the middle, you're going to have a great hall where the Lord Bishop or the Lord Bishop is going to come from one end, come in. Food and services are going to come in from the other side, and your guests are going to come in through the main entranceway. So your guests will come in through the gateway. You've got your stables, you've got your kitchens, you have your great hall, and you have next to it you have the Archbishop's quarters and chapel. And then the Archbishop will also usually have a way to get into his or her his minster. Not his or her minster yet. Well, actually, Canterbury, yes, that is right. Similar sort of thing here. You've got the Bishop's quarters, and you've got the Great Hall, and possibly this is Wells, and place for the kitchens. York, we just have a bit of a random collection of buildings in the middle of nowhere in this reconstruction, so it doesn't quite fit. But there must have been a lot here. You have so much royalty coming and staying here that this is not just a random collection of buildings here which have been underinvested in. You have people continually coming and staying, sometimes on the way north to invade Scotland, sometimes to come and get married here and then invade Scotland, sometimes anyway, all sorts of reasons, different ones would come up with for being here. So there should be something a little bit more substantial. What we know for sure is you have this arcade, which is probably the ground story wall of a building, not a cloister, but a building because, as Stuart Harrison pointed out, you've probably got the shutters for the windows and other things on this. So that's part of a building. We've got the chapel, and we also have another building, but a little extension behind the chapel, which may be a bit earlier in date from it. So we've got a couple of things which may be 12th century, that and this, and we've got the chapel itself, which may be 13th century. So this is kind of what we know we have. We have the chapel, extension, arcade of some sort of building, and probably something down here. We also know we've got to have a great hall somewhere. We know that because its dimensions are given after a feast of 1486 where it's all described. It's described as being, well, it's not actually described in metric, but it's 36 by 23 metres large. So where is it? There is nothing in the ground penetrating radar to suggest it is actually in the middle. Nothing. The argument could be, oh, it's hidden by the water tank. It's quite big. And we're seeing other medieval things. So I'm not really convinced by that. The only reason for thinking it might have been in the middle was the idea that there was a statue commemorating its position there. And the statue was in the gardens. Well, the gardens are actually quite a large area, so it needn't actually be there. Another suggestion was there was a map which had Great Hall written over the riding school, thinking that might have been the Great Hall. Well, the riding school was a Great Hall, just not that Great Hall. It's a different size. Could it be further along there? Well, the arcade that we've got isn't quite long enough to be the front there, but it could be. Or is it there? It's just a perfect fit. And I didn't even have to fudge it. Not that I would ever do that. It's starting precisely where that arcade finishes, going right to where this wall is. And that wall is marked in as that precise end there is seen on, again, yet another legal document from 1813. This seems to be probably where the hall is. It would also work wonderfully, meaning you've got the Archbishop, chaplain quarters here could come in from this side. The service quarters could have food coming in from this side. You can have your guests coming in through the gate, having their carriages or dropping their horse off and then going in. It works just like we would expect an Archbishop's palace to. So this is probably a little bit more like what the Archbishop Palace layout is like. All around sort of a fairly large, neat square, where possibly also would expect something here, some kind of covered way, so the Archbishop can go from the chapel into a private access doorway into the Minster. And you've got one potential entranceway there near to the chapter house. Now, a quick comparison. I know primacy was pretty much established around the age of Thurston, but let's just compare York and Canterbury because it's a popular thing to do. Canterbury, the hall is quite big, but in terms of general overall size, York's bigger. Just saying, that's all. I'm not going to get into any further ecclesiastical discourse. York's bigger. Can I have 5 minutes just to finish? The last thing is, do we have any evidence for where the Anglo-Saxon Minster was? The Anglo-Saxon period, we should not just be looking for the Minster. There are so many other buildings as well. Church of St. Mary, Church of Alma Sophia, a belfry, a possible monasterium, the cathedral school and library, the refectory and dormitory of the canons. There's lots that we have no idea where it is. Absolutely none. Have I found any absolute evidence for anything? Not sure. Various options have been given, and I'll quickly run through the option and then wrap up. First option is, it's often thought the Minster, the Anglo-Saxon Minster, might have been, number one, just down here at the south. Might have been here, in the middle of the Principia of the Roman legionary fortress, partly because that's where you've got burials and other things from that kind of period, very close by. There's never been a trace of direct evidence for it. We did ground-penetrating radar there, but it couldn't see through the road. Second option. This was a wonderful one by Christopher Norton, noting the very kind of square nature of this precinct, and thinking about Aachen and sort of imagining this is his classic plan of the current Minster, and imagining that the Church of St. Peter's might have been in the middle of this square. Have we found anything in the middle of the square? Again, the same thing. Could it be completely and totally hidden by the water tank? I doubt it. I think the water tank, it does cover some things, but you'd have it poking out one side or another. You can't always say the water tank's covering things. And I can't see anything there. So I'm going to say I love that paper, but I don't think that's where it is. Third suggestion. We have something we don't know what it is, and that's this feature here. This feature is about 1 metre to 1 metre and 3/4 underground, so it's a very substantial stone, presumably stone feature. It's directly onto the path, and it doesn't carry on over here, it doesn't carry on over there, which makes me think it's not make-up for the path or for the Victorian road, which was there as well. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it. When you have a look at, say, the position of the Old Minster at Winchester, just north of the contemporary cathedral, you kind of think, well, could that be part of the Minster? It's interesting. It's if you put in the service pipe through the park ever again and potentially could have a look at it, take a look at it. And there are plenty of pipes that go all the way through the middle of it, including the water pipes going to the tank. So you could easily open up a trench there without damaging anything new. Fourth possibility. Christopher Norton's idea was predicated on the extraordinary links between York and places like Aachen and the world of Charlemagne. This is the area where you've got Alcuin, both hosting people coming over here to the library and to the school, and then being pinched by Charlemagne, and then living out his days in Aachen, but also this whole incredibly connected medieval world. And at Aachen, we have this new layout created at the time of a square with council halls and then the chapel, the Palatine Chapel, amazing building of Charlemagne, on one side. Well, perhaps you have the same thing here. Perhaps you could have had the Anglo-Saxon Minster somewhere here, or indeed somewhere on this side. Probably not here. Here, if it was there, it's gone. So let's just have a look at our remains here again. It's easiest just to imagine all of these are later medieval, but what if they're earlier? This is just slightly turned around, those features. And just curious at that kind of block there. All of these are at the same scale. These are various other kind of 8th, 9th century churches in Britain. Could it be the substructure of one of those? I don't know. No idea. But it's just floating that idea out there, going, well, play around with possibilities. The final one is Chris Norton thought that this might be the chapter house at York, might be where Alma Sophia was, the Anglo-Saxon church. There are a number of reasons for that. The chapter house is very late at York compared with some earlier ones elsewhere, which is slightly surprising. So it's thinking perhaps it's actually replacing an earlier structure that's underneath. This could indeed have been sort of replacing, imitating some other churches constructed around in Italy, or indeed aping the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. But it could also be a development of, say, for example, the original church in St Edwin, which all we know is originally a baptistry, which could be a circular tub, which has been surrounded by a square. Here's an example of one of them in Merovingian Gaul, in Provence, where you've got a rectangular building surrounding an octagonal baptistry. And perhaps you might have something like that, and that's what the early minster is. No idea. The key thing is not to say what it is, because we don't have the evidence. The key thing is just to put the ideas out there, so should any holes be put in the ground anywhere for whatever purpose, you have an idea what the possibilities are. So just floating those. I've run through them. I've shamelessly gone over time. But you're going to be gentle with me, and it means that I don't have to answer quite so many awkward questions. Okay.
So, John, please do take a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have some time for questions. We really want to hear the question that you ask, so could I ask anybody who does have a question to raise their hand and then wait until the microphone gets to you, please. We've got two runners, amazing runners with our microphones. They will make their way to you as quickly as possible. So I can see we have a question in the gallery area.
Hello, thank you for the lovely talk. I'm going to ask you a question that I think you're going to dislike, but you keep saying we can't say everything's underneath the water tank. I'm going to make an educated guess that the answer to this is no, considering they had more important things to do in 1940. But when they dug up the water tank, did they do any kind of archaeological survey underneath it? It would tell us what is there, or were they a bit busy trying to sort of...
There was no
war.
It's a very sensible question. There is no mention or report of anything having been found. Nonetheless, at other interventions where people are burrowing in to make air raid shelters in the city defences, people are discovering things and reporting them. So you can't say they didn't discover anything, but the fact that no one mentioned anything is sort of telling, because things are being reported elsewhere. I think that's the only way of really kind of thinking about things, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. We did look quite closely for the any sort of anecdotal evidence, and you know what York is like. If people see things, usually there's a folk memory of that makes its way down the generations. So as far as we know, there were no major archaeological discoveries when those water tanks went in. But I think one of the important things, John, that you've revealed is there's quite a lot of overburden there. So we had assumed that the water tanks had probably destroyed a lot of the archaeology, and I think, John, you and Martin have suggested there might be archaeology still there. We just can't see through it.
Yes. On one of the plans I showed, that you see the Victorian Park sort of 1952 path going very close to the water tank. What you can't see on that illustration, but what I have the data for, is in some places that path is only 20 centimetres under the surface. As you get towards the water tank, it's 1.40 metre under the surface. So there's a lot of overburden there around the tank itself. So I think the tank is not as deeply dug down in as kind of perhaps 0.5 metre taken away and then soil put around its structure.
I should say that some of you will remember the late Richard Hall, and certainly when we were at the Minster, we had a hope, we had a thought that the water tanks had a leak, and we were very excited about taking them out. It turns out they didn't have a leak. And there are very important plans to use those now as part of the sustainable energy solution. So I'm not sure that we will be found with a pickaxe, John.
No, but I fantasised that there wasn't water in there, and I might be able to do crown penetrating radar within the water tank of the base of it. But no, it's full of water still.
Great question. Other questions? We have one just here, please.
You only went down to around about 2 metres then. What might there be beyond that? How deep is bedrock in that location? Is there more to find?
No, archaeologically, you're probably getting onto pretty much virgin sediment. It's not bedrock as such immediately just here. Probably about 2.5 metres under the Deanery Garden. It can get to probably about 3 to 4 metres just south of the Minster. So there's quite a bit of variation. But there's been a big project kind of going through boreholes across the entire city, trying to map and see how deep you have to go before you get to what we could call natural, but it's pre-human deposits.
I think it's a very interesting landscape for us in York generally, and one of the theories that emerged from the work that Mark Wyman did with York Archaeological Trust a few years ago is that site has always been an ancient site of tribute. Perhaps that explains not just the sort of topography as a locus for the Roman fortress being there, but also that it was always a place of power. So it's quite an intriguing theory, but yes. We probably, the Roman archaeology there that John has discovered has told us more about the fortress, and maybe that's another festival idea.
It's shown us Roman forts are laid out like Roman forts.
More questions. We have one here and one here, please. Sir, can I take this one first?
Thank you. This follows on from the last question, really. Do you have a sense that if you returned with your ground-penetrating radar recalibrated with different frequencies, you could pick up stuff down to 4 metres or so? Would you looking to be doing that to find further information, maybe getting to Roman?
That's a very sensible question. Yes and no. Leven is the person who did the ground-penetrating radar work, and we started off by experimenting with 5 different sets of kits of a number of different frequencies. And our test area was the residence garden right next to the Minster Library, for the simple reason we knew roughly what was there. So we wanted to know what what we could find. So we optimized for that depth. What we hadn't really quite realized was how the depth changes so much over the whole of the precinct. So I think if we optimized for a different area, we might be able to see things. But the problem is the further you go down, the less the resolution is. So you saw that the walls of the barrack buildings were a lot finer, a lot narrower than the medieval buildings. So it's possible that even if we get the frequency adjusted to be responding to things deeper down, you still won't see things. But I think it would be worth using multiple frequencies. There are some new kinds of ground penetrating radar equipment called step frequency systems, which go through a whole series of different cycles through a whole series of different frequencies, and we actually use those on the roads. And it might be worth using that kind of equipment on an area survey in the future. You live and you learn.
There was a question here.
Do you think the Reformation had a significant impact on the changes that happened around the Minster?
Oh, totally. The Reformation was what allowed Ingram effectively to take over a number of the leases from a lot of the preparatory mansions around the Minster, consolidating them into his own private estate. And it took several centuries before that got taken back by the church in kind of legal cases in the early 19th century, well, late 18th, early 19th century. So yes, phenomenal impact.
So obviously York is a secular cathedral, not a monastic cathedral, so perhaps not as radical as the impacts on some of those cathedrals like Norwich or indeed St Mary's next door. But there's a wonderful PhD thesis by Stefania Merlo-Perring and an article which is widely available online, which is exactly about that subject, the Reformation, and its impact on the buildings in the close. And John looked very closely at that as part of his research. So I recommend that.
It's very, very well worth reading, which is why she's up there. It's a phenomenal piece of work, and she did some early GIS work as well, trying to work out everything. It can be found online.
But it's true to say that, you know, all around the close, even buildings that we look at and seem very 19th century, when you look in the roofs, when you look in the cellars, most of them have medieval origins. So there are lots of hidden secrets there too. Do we have any other questions? It's very hard to see at the back whether or not the lights are so bright. But any final questions?
Where are we heading to?
I'll slip in another question if I can. There was one of your slides said the palace by Ingram was leased for 3 lives. What does that mean?
3 generations. So it's not a fixed date. Basically, 3 generations of Ingram's descendants need to pass, and then it can come back.
If your child dies young, would that count? You know, it was pretty common back in the day, I suppose.
I guess that would be what the lawyers would sort out.
More time for Sir Arthur Ingram in Chancery. Any final question? Well, John, I just want to thank you for giving us such a fascinating insight into this wonderful project. We should say that we are very grateful to the Arts and Humanities Research Council for the funding they provided for this project, but also to John and Martin and Leuven, who spent so much time walking the streets of York and revealing some of its secrets. If you don't know about the research, do have a look on the Historic Environment Record at the City of York Council's website. All of John and Martin's reports are there, and you can read them at your leisure. And hopefully there will be some more publications coming out of the project soon. But can I ask you to join me in thanking John for such an informative talk?